What's up, fam? It's your boy Demuir here, purveyor of all sounds underground. Thanks for joining me once again. I'm just out here cooling out. It's not another episode of DJs and Cars reviewing promos that's coming in a few weeks. But really, one of the things I do each week as the week closes out or it's about to begin sometimes is just go for drives and think about my week and think about some of the things that I've done or haven't done or should have been done. And I thought it'd be interesting to bring this to an episode of taking a track that I revisited and said, geez man, if I had to do it again, I would do it all over, and here's some things I would change or not do. And just so happens one of those tracks happens to be The Get Down, which hit number one on Track Source's Jackin' Top 100 chart, and it remained there remained in the top 10 for a number of weeks. So it's interesting the way that song came about. I previously released it on my own label, Makita Sky, and I was just getting back into the game of producing music, and I just realized how much I've matured and how many things I've learned that I was able to go back to that same track and just do it properly. And shout out to Milty Evans of Whitebeard Records Chicago for allowing me to do that. And I think the results speak for itself. A lot of people got into the song. A lot of great DJs supported the song, like Mark Farinas, a number of folks like PP, Matthew Bryan, and a number of individuals just got into it. So anyways, I'm gonna do my drive, give the ride a wash, and then we'll get back into the studio and get into it, and I'll share some of the do's and don'ts in terms of the things I've learned in production. Alright, peace. It's your boy Demuir here, chilling in the studio, and I'm gonna give you a walkthrough of the do's and don'ts. I'm gonna take like 3 from each as I reflect on the creation, the Get Down. So as I said, I originally put Get Down out on my label Makita Sky 5 years ago, and it didn't do well, and the reasons why it didn't do well will make itself very clear as I step you through the do's and don'ts. But I originally did it in Logic 9. The one that came out on Whitebeard Records recently was done in Logic Pro X, and then I have the original sample here, which I'll step through. So I'm going to go through the top 3 things that I just didn't do well, and then we're going to flip back into the top 3 things that I did do well, which I believe is attributed to why things were so successful in terms of charts and support and how it sounds on club systems around the world. So let's get into it. So the first and foremost thing I would say that I didn't do very well is the sample treatment. The original sample here, I'll give you a listen to it. Now you'll see, if I play that at a normal level, you'll notice that it's a little quiet. And this is the thing I did wrong, was I didn't realize, now revisiting the sample again, how badly mastered the record was on vinyl. And I have a number of copies of this record, but when I actually look at it in the waveform here, you'll see that it's quite quiet. Now most earlier records, they're not the big compressed blocks of sound that you see now in modern day recordings, or what record labels and some competitive A&R would say it's competitive. It's quite low. So my approach for dealing with that was completely wrong. If I go back into Logic 9 here, you'll see what I did was, like, as I look across the board, I compressed the fuck out of everything with the intention of getting a larger sound right at the sample source. But what I should have done is normalize the waveform to keep the transients intact, as opposed to compressing it, because all compressing is going to do is squash the sound and just make it non-pleasing, and it'll remove the dynamics, those things that keep people interested in dancing to what they're hearing psychologically. So I go back into the project here and I see that I compress not only the open sample, but I compress the filtered bass of the sample, and then on top of that I played bass over it, so you get all these squashed frequencies that just by the time it gets to mastering, there's just no hope whatsoever for it. So that's the first thing. I just didn't treat the sample well. I should have normalized the low sample as opposed to compressing the hell out of it. The next thing that I didn't do, when I glance across the board here, I left a lot of these instruments in stereo, thinking for whatever stupid reason that would translate to the club. And you know, you'll hear all the great producers, the great engineers, sound engineers and recording engineers say this: clubs are predominantly a mono-based system. So the best sounding tracks are mainly mixed down and recorded in mono as best as possible for most of the instruments. So I look across here, you know, I got the bass and I got the filter. Let me hear this. Oh my god. I got the bass in stereo, and bass frequencies, whether it's played bass, kicks, really should be in mono, because they need to be down the center where you want people to feel it. And when it goes to a stereo interpretation, what happens is you risk yourself at phasing depending on the quality of the sample, in which I just told you the sample was not treated well. So I'm listening to that filtered bass and it's just not coming off right. Let me see. Yeah, and I played bass in this as well. Let's play this. I left that in stereo too. Oh my god. So all things mono, because it will translate more appropriately into the clubs, and people will actually feel the samples, they will feel the music, the kicks, everything sitting lovely, because when it's in stereo it's just not going to translate appropriately in a club. So the next thing that I didn't do well, I just overcomplicated this whole thing. So as I said earlier, I put compressors on everything. I didn't treat the sample well because I thought I could compensate for it in the mix. And as a result, I think, of not treating the sample very well, I added a whole bunch of instruments. Like, I'm looking here across 4 separate tracks. Mind you, they're not compressed, but what I've got here, I've got a Jupiter 8 and an ES2, all playing string parts that, quite frankly, sit well in the sample, but I thought I had to like compensate by putting in a string section here. I'll just listen to how it sounds. So. And I bet because it's in stereo, it just drowns out. You can barely hear it. Yeah? I mean, you can hear it. No. I'll even turn this up. God. Oh, that just sounds awful. So those are my top 3 things that I just did not do well in the original composition of this track. I did not treat the sample well. I did not understand the premise of mono versus stereo when it comes to translating the track into the club. And then the whole concept of less is more. Like, this is just crazy. I had compression on everything, and I had a bunch of string parts here that were just not necessary, because had I treated the sample well, all of those decisions would have been very different. So you could see the impact of that. Now let's move into the top 3 things that I believe went well, and as a result, resulted in the song being charted at #1 and remaining in the top 10 on TrackSource for a number of weeks. So the first thing is that whenever I do my projections, now that I understand the difference between mono versus stereo and how that impacts the club environment, I got buses on everything. Like, I got a bus for every instrument on machine here. I got a bus for, keyboards, percussion, and then I also have additional treatment buses for the main instruments that hit off very predominantly in the club, like the kick, like the snare. Certain percussions at times I'll bus out for separate treatment. So I got it all lined out here, and this has been invaluable. And I find when you understand the importance of bus treatment for specific instruments or groups of instruments, it really translates nicely in terms of the sound, not only in the studio but in the club, because you're making people's lives much easier, whether it's the sound man at the club or the DJ when he's playing and he's told not to hit the reds and stuff. You just keep things very consistent, and more importantly, when a mastering engineer gets it, they're in love with it and feel like they can do a lot to bring the track out. The second thing that I did well was I put more variation on the bass. So although I did play bass in the first version of this back in 2010 in Logic 9, I realized that in order to keep things moving along in the groove, you gotta make it sound like the real deal. And I do play bass, and I recorded different bass parts here. So if we zoom in, you see, I've got straightforward bass parts here. So let me just highlight one of these. So that's like the main groove, and here's another one where I'm doing something differently. I think it's where it goes ba-da-doo, ba-bo-doo-doo-doo. So yeah. So I put those pieces in there, and I got another variation of bass. It's probably like in a breakdown somewhere, I wonder. Let's see. Yeah, it's in the breakdown. Yeah, this part where they're saying get down. Yeah. So again, more variation on the bass to keep it interesting, because in the first version, I was just rocking it with this. Now, I mean, that's funky, but after a while, it just gets kind of tired. So the third and last thing that I've done very differently here, it's all in the investment. And what that basically means is I made sure I invested everything, my time, what technology to purchase, to make my sound be at that top tier level with a lot of the good guys. You just simply have to, if you're serious about this shit, you have to commit yourself and sacrifice at times. So I won't get into that whole thing, but I could certainly tell you back in 2010, I was just thinking I could just whip the track together and it'll sound great and sell lots of copies, but that's not at all the case. You have to invest time in learning about the importance of mono and stereo and how to separate buses and how to treat certain instruments and what plugins to get, you know what I mean, and how those would enhance your sound eventually. Those are all the things that I did this time around, and it's come together quite nicely. So Again, to rhyme them off, top 3 things are I bust almost every instrument and created certain groups for treatment. I also put variation on the bass to keep it dynamic and interested and vibing with the song. And then the last piece is the investment in terms of technology, time, and learning more about the craft to make sure that things are on par. I think a lot of people think music production, especially in electronic music, is not much, but a lot of people don't realize that the person producing the song, like myself, is also engineering and recording vocals and doing all of these things to make sure things are on par and making those critical mix down decisions before it gets sent off for mastering. So that's my producer tip for the week as I revisit the do's and don'ts of the Get Down. I hope you enjoyed this, and I welcome you to come back each and every Wednesday. We'll be posting videos. Let's go.